So the EFF has added its voice to calls for Justice Minister Thembi Simelane to step down over alleged links to the VBS Mutual Bank saga. Simelane allegedly accepted a loan of over R500,000 from a company linked to the looting of the now defunct VBS Bank. Well, News 24 and the Daily Maverick reported that she used the money to buy a coffee shop in Sandton. At the same time, Simelane was mayor of Polokwane. The municipality illegally invested close to R350 million into VBS. Now, Action SA has since asked the public protector to investigate the allegations, while the Democratic Alliance wants the minister to answer to Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Justice. But let's now get some reaction. For that, we are joined by the head of investigations at Open Secrets, Michael Marchant. Michael, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to start with this, just the role of Open Secrets, perhaps some of the work that you've been doing to follow VBS monies and how they've been moving, and certainly where the Justice Minister may or may not be involved.
Good morning, Naledi, and good morning to those watching. So from Open Secrets' perspective, our first interest in the VBS story really came through the interest in KPMG and the auditors at VBS. And so we were looking at that part of the work while other investigators and investigative journalists were telling other parts of the story. And I suppose the story now breaking about Minister Nkadimeng really reminds us that the story of VBS is so far-reaching. I guess the scale of the theft from the bank, but also the scale of the activities that were involved in that theft. And of course, in this regard, it was also about unlawfully getting municipal funds into the bank so that the money could be stolen. And so many individuals in that ecosystem were then paid to facilitate the unlawful transactions. They were paid kickbacks. And then in this instance, you've got the minister, or at the time, the mayor of Polokwane, getting what they claim is a loan to purchase a coffee shop, but it's coming from the same individuals who are receiving VBS kickbacks.
Yeah. And
really, it's just one more, I guess, sad installment in a saga that has really, caught so many individuals in its web.
Yeah, obviously you talk about what the investigative journalists have done, the likes of Daily Maverick, for instance, but I'm keen to hear, your sort of findings on how that movement of money would have worked. And you talk about money invested into VBS, and you say with the intent of it being looted. But I want to talk about the monies, right? So, and just clarify, I suppose the chronology here, if you will, because my understanding is an 80 million rand separate from a 50 million rand deposited from the Polokwane municipality into VBS. What then?
Yeah, so essentially, Polokwane was one of many municipalities that was making unlawful deposits into VBS bank accounts. And as I've said, part of that was to provide money, I guess, to be stolen, but it was also to plug gaps because so much money was being funneled out of VBS. They urgently needed some cash, at least, to come in order to keep that scheme going. And so Gundo Wealth Solutions and the individuals around that, and they're the relevant actors in this case, they were some of many people who were essentially paid intermediaries. So VBS went to them and said, go out and compel and get municipalities like Polokwane to give us money. And so in this instance, you refer to the 80 million, and there was a further payment after that of more than 50 million. It was more than 130 million in total. Once, that had been secured by the municipality for VBS would pay the middlemen, in this case, Gundo Wealth Solutions, pay them kickbacks essentially as a thank you for getting that money. So those kickbacks are paid to Gundo Wealth Solutions. And it's then very soon after that the purported loan is provided by them to Nkadimeng to purchase the coffee shop in Sandton. And I guess this is the nub of the concern around this issue, is it really, Naledi, as you said, it goes to the timing, is that there's such a clear chronological link between the money coming into VBS, the kickbacks being paid to Gundo Wealth Solutions, and then the loan being provided to the minister while she is the mayor of the municipality that is making the unlawful deposits and has essentially contracted Gundo Wealth Solutions.
Yep.
And when you put all of those things together, that's why there's been, I think, this wide reaction and also concern about whether it's tenable for the minister to remain in position if these questions can't be answered.
Yeah, you know, there's so many links, of course, and so much movement that I almost want to explain all of it just so that the viewer understands where the crime would have started in an instance like this. And of course, I almost want to start with the contravention of the Municipal Finance Management Act, why that is such an important piece of legislation that essentially says that municipalities cannot deposit into mutual banks.
So this is crucial. As you say, the Act prevents that. So it prevents municipalities from making deposits into mutual banks such as VBS. And it's precisely for the reason around risk, essentially, is that it's around ensuring that the municipalities are not making deposits that they may not get back. In this particular instance, Polokwane City is one of the very few municipalities that was able to recover funds. But one of the terrible things about the VBS, the crimes and the scandals around VBS is that many municipalities never got it back. And so the impact really of what happened at VBS was twofold. It was what happened at the bank, obviously the depositors, the individuals who lost out on their money because that money was stolen from the bank. But for many municipalities, they also lost out on deposits. And, as we know, and you were speaking about it immediately prior to the segment, of course, municipalities are in crisis in South Africa. Service delivery is falling apart. Citizens are not receiving the basic services. And when a municipality, makes a deposit, for example, in this way, it never gets that money back. That is just adding, to the problems.
Yeah, I'm keen to also, look at the issue of whether or not National Treasury's hands are tied here. I mean, it was just last month, mid-July. This is when we heard of the conviction and sentencing of Chifiwa Matodzi, where National Treasury released a statement talking about all the steps that they had taken to inform municipalities around the act and why, from 2016 onwards, they had tried to speak to municipalities around making these investments. I mean, would you argue, and I know perhaps you're not quite an analyst, but an investigative, your field really being as head of investigations, but your view in how much National Treasury could have done to stop municipalities from making these deposits?
So, Naledi, as you say, I'm not an expert in that area of policy, but what I would say, I think it's an important question, is that the question around VBS is not only about this side of the story in National Treasury, but it's really about, I guess, all of the institutions of state and whether they did enough. So, for example, was the Reserve Bank proactive enough in terms of its regulatory position with regards to banks and what was happening at VBS? Was Treasury forceful enough with municipalities in this regard? I think that it's also easy, I suppose, to forget that many of these things were happening at the height of state capture.
Yeah.
It was a time of great turmoil within institutions. It was a time of great change. We know the Treasury was under sustained attack, for example, by those actors linked to state capture. Ministers were changing, people were leaving the department and being pressured to leave.
Yeah.
And so I guess that there was also some kind of institutional weakness at that time that helps to explain those failures. But it is important to recognize that it was an ecosystem of regulation, really, that was failing in this regard. And that's on the side of Treasury, on the side of the Reserve Bank, and others. And of course, the private sector, I started this story. KPMG were the auditors of VBS. One of their auditors is now being criminally charged. But of course, KPMG was continuously signing off that everything was fine at VBS.
So let me ask you this, and we go back now to the Justice Minister Thembi Simelane. Of course, now the calls are being made. The EFF also saying she should step down. The Democratic Alliance wanting her to answer to Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Justice. But one of the things that we've heard from Glynis Breitenbach is she needs to just come before Parliament and prove that this R500,000 loan was above board. How would she do that, Michael?
So, Naledi, it's a really good question. I think that the obvious thing that's making this look so suspicious in the public domain is when someone says this was a very straightforward commercial loan agreement, but I can't provide you any documents to show that it was a loan. It obviously raises the suspicion that there was more to it, that it wasn't so straightforward, and that there may be more to it. But what your question suggests, and I would agree with you, is that even if she can produce a document that says this was a commercial loan, and even show that some of it or all of it was repaid, that wouldn't address the issue that we started the interview with, which is the chronology, which is why she would have received a loan from this particular entity that was receiving unlawful kickbacks for facilitating VBS deposits from the municipality that she was the head of.
Yeah.
So why would she have chosen this entity? It seems such a strange choice given what's happening at the time. And if the funds themselves were criminal in nature, but criminal from an entity where she was the executive mayor, even if it was a normal loan, I think you then have the secondary question whether that's even, that is tenable.
Yeah.
And so I think even beyond that, as you're suggesting, there are a whole range of questions that would have to be answered.
But we're talking about the Justice Minister. I mean, you need to think about what this looks like also. And I wonder if that's something that we should be concerned about with the calls growing for her to step down. So that clarity obviously needed. But what sort of investigations and by whom? And I'm speaking now from within our own authorities needs to go back and look at it to say, okay, well, then let's get the clarity because this is our Justice Minister.
The fact that she is the Justice Minister, as you say, is one of the more concerning parts of this story because she is politically essentially the head of, the line minister for the National Prosecuting Authority, the Hawks, and all the law enforcement agencies tasked with investigating this matter. Obviously, her response is that there's operational independence of law enforcement agencies. And that's true, but of course, the minister controls the budget. The minister sits on the cabinet cluster around justice, and of course has a huge amount of influence on this space. And so any conflict of interest or purported conflict of interest is going to destroy, once again, the trust of the public in the institutions and the reasons for the decisions that they make. I think in terms of who needs to investigate this, I think it's absolutely right that the Portfolio Committee on Justice in Parliament has called on the minister to appear. That's exactly what we want our portfolio committees to be doing in Parliament. And so that should absolutely go ahead. But I think also in this case, we know that the prosecutions of VBS accused are so advanced. We have people like Tipiwe Matodzi and others making plea agreements and releasing information. It is also really going to be incumbent on those law enforcement agencies to fully investigate this. They should have access to the flow of funds, to a great deal of detailed evidence that's not in the public domain, to establish the precise timing of the payments and if there was anything untoward. That information ultimately will need to be made public.
Yeah.
And then either the minister needs to decide for herself that it's untenable given the situation, or the president will need to intervene if nothing is done.
Yeah, well, we'll see how things unfold, and we certainly will be reaching out as well to the Justice Minister Thembi Simelane to get her side of the story. Thank you so much for your time, though. The head of investigations at Open Secrets, Michael Marchant.